Father, I want to move on to this ongoing and seemingly endless Vatican financial trial, now in its third year. It all stems from a deal between the Vatican and an investment manager who sold the Secretariat of State a London building where the Vatican lost over 100 million euros. Eventually, several Curial officials were swept up in indictments and numerous financial crimes, including Cardinal Angelo Becciu, essentially the Pope's chief of staff. Now, Father, as this case drags on and on, does anyone even remember what's at stake here? I mean, Cardinal Becciu maintains his innocence. Prosecutors have as yet not been able to prove he benefited financially from the shady deals. Is this criminal activity gross incompetence on part of the Secretariat, or both? And what do you make of the trial?
Well, as an American, you look at the system of justice that is used, and this is, of course, this is a trial being conducted by Vatican City State. So it is, it's not the Holy See as a religious entity. It's the Vatican City State, which is, you know, the governing entity for that territory. Now, in America, when you have a trial that's complex, you don't take a month-long recess, as they seem to do in Italy. The Vatican system follows Italian justice, so they'll do hearings, and then take a recess for a few weeks or a month, and they'll come back, do more hearings. So, sad to say, with that, you get a 3-year-long trial. For most people, they can't follow the arguments because they forgot where they started. I will say this, I am very sympathetic to the prosecution based on what I've read, because I think the Vatican was deceived by some of the people who were involved in advising it, and then also in the management side. And if it wasn't you know, a matter of conspiring to commit a crime, certainly negligence and rash actions which resulted in harm are also punishable in law. So I'm waiting to see what the decision, but again, this is, you know, in the modern world, there's no reason that we can't speed up trials and not allow this thing to go on and on and on. But, you know, the Italian system of justice has a different view of how things should proceed, and they give more time in between actual court sessions than we do in the U.S.
Well, Father, there's not only the you know, the expansive drag-on trial that happened in Italy. Lay on top of that the Vatican intrusions into this process. I mean, there have been some very odd interventions along the way by Pope Francis himself. Can you speak to those and how that might queer this case altogether?
Well, this has to do with the nature of the Holy See, which is essentially a monarchy. There is not a separation of powers as we have in an elective democracy such as the United States, a republican form of government. So the chief executive is the Pope. He's also the chief judge, and he's the chief legislator. So what happens is the legislation in place and then the implementing regulations, he can change them at will as the process is unfolding. The question that people have is that fair to do that? And I would say it's fair if it regulates or remedies a lacuna or an absence in the law or something that is manifestly out of not just or doesn't favor the equal administration of justice. So, of course, to most people in the secular world, when a trial starts, you can't change the rules of how the trial is conducted, and that's understandable. But in this case, the Pope has made a few interventions along the way. Now, of course, defense attorneys are going to argue, as they have, this vitiates the whole process, but that's not how it works in the Holy See administration of justice.
Father, last week there was the big story of Cardinal Raymond Burke losing his Vatican residence and his pension, seemingly as a punishment for his outspoken criticism of Pope Francis's policies or the way in which the teachings of Pope Francis have been disseminated. So far, there's no indication that this decision has or will be reversed. In fact, just the opposite. Father Jerry, canonically, is such a decision licit, depriving a cardinal of his residence and his pension simply for disagreeing with the Pope on matters of doctrine or the way in which the faith is being explained to the populace?
I think there's a serious canonical question here of equity and justice because what Cardinal Burke lost, the two things, one is his pension, essentially his retirement benefit, in view of the years of service that he gave to the Holy See in his capacity as a cardinal. So to take away someone's pension is a serious matter because a pension is not a privilege or a favor. It's owed in justice. In fact, it's what we call deferred compensation. So the Holy See, instead of paying, X amount plus whatever the pension payment would be, waits until the person retires, just pays them X, and then starts giving the pension after they retire. So that's wrong. Now, as regards the housing, this again is a form of compensation. The Pope earlier this year changed the rules about charging market rates for Vatican City-owned apartments. And I was troubled at the time because you can ask a cardinal to pay market rates if you pay him a market salary. So if the cardinal is going to receive, let's say he would receive the salary that, executive vice presidents receive in the corporate world, of course he can go out and pay for his apartment at market rates. But the church isn't a corporation, and the cardinals are servants of God. So we basically say, we'll give you X amount, we'll provide you with subsidized housing, and then we'll give you a pension because no one expects when a cardinal retires that he won't have some money in the bank. I think Cardinal Burke has been treated unfairly. I regret to say that because, the Cardinal and the Pope obviously have some disagreements. But as you say, a disagreement here is not a cause for punishment. It shouldn't be. I think the Pope has made a mistake. I hope he'll reconsider. And, I follow Cardinal Burke's career. He's a wonderful bishop. He's saying nothing now that they said the same things under John Paul II and Benedict. He's defending Catholic teaching, and as we know, there are plenty of cardinals who don't defend Catholic teaching, and they're given favor. So the people of God are seriously concerned about this.
Well, you make such a great point. The church property, Father, and we've heard this again and again from the Pope, that we're the people of God, and the church belongs to all of us, and everyone is welcome. Well, that property, that apartment, that right across from St. Peter's, that belongs to us too. And when you're saying, but we're going to charge market value for it, well, who's going to be occupying that apartment? And does this rule now apply to all Curial cardinals? Are you telling me the new head of the Doctrine of Faith and the new Cardinal Farrell and all of these cardinals, they're going to get no payment, no pension, no income, and they're going to be charged market rate for their Vatican apartments? I don't think so. I don't think this is an equal application of the rule. And some have said, well, the Pope is now just explaining the new rule in Rome. Well, then apply it to everybody. But I agree with you. I think it's silly to charge market rate. These men aren't making market rates in their income. I'll give you the last word on this.
Yeah, no, and let's look at this. I'm a Catholic priest. I run a parish. The salary is quite low compared to what was conceivable, if you look at what teachers and administrators get in different fields. But I don't mind because I signed on for this. Cardinal Burke, same thing. I signed on for this. Don't take away my pension when I turn 75 because you're upset about a few things I say. If that was the policy, then we would basically have to line a lot of people up in the Vatican and ask them, do you agree with Cardinal Burke or not? And say, well, sorry, if you agree with him, you got to leave your apartment. No, we don't do this. No, I hope the Pope will reconsider because, Cardinal Burke almost died when he got COVID. This is no way to treat him now that he's in retirement. I think this is a big mistake.
Yeah. Father Jerry, I want to get your take on something Pope Francis said about evangelization and the liturgy at his Wednesday general audience. He said this: creativity to proclaim Jesus with joy to everyone and today. In this age of ours, which does not help us have a religious outlook on life, and in which the proclamation has become in various places more difficult, arduous, apparently fruitless, the temptation to desist from pastoral service may arise. Perhaps one takes refuge in safety zones, like the habitual repetition of things one always does, or in the alluring calls of an intimist spirituality, or even in a misunderstood sense of the centrality of the liturgy. They are temptations that disguise themselves as fidelity to tradition, but often, rather than responses to the Spirit, they are reactions to personal dissatisfactions. So, Father, that's a little hard to make sense of all of that because it bounces around in the language. I think it's hard for people to process. But the Pope is saying evangelization is hampered by this misunderstood sense of the centrality of the liturgy and repeating what we've heard before. First of all, what was your take on that? And I thought the liturgy was central to the exercise of faith.
Well, there are a few things there. The Pope refers to personal dissatisfactions as the reason people take refuge in liturgy. Now, wait a minute. Are you saying that people are maladjusted and malcontents and disturbed or unstable, and therefore they look for stability in a timeless liturgy? I wouldn't go there, Holy Father, because that's imputing to them things that can't possibly be known, and in my experience is not the case. The centrality of the liturgy, by the way, I think we have to remember, what is the liturgy? It's an act of worship. So the worship of God is the first commandment. I am the Lord your God, you have no other God besides me. We have to worship God, and then we do the works of charity, then we do the educational part, then we receive the sacraments. But if we don't worship God, now I think what the Pope is getting at, which we know is something he doesn't like, is the Latin liturgy. And that he said before that people who do that are backwardists and nostalgics, who like to, find peace and security, etc., in the old liturgy. Again, I say, Holy Father, please have a little comprehension for the fact that people who like Gregorian chant, Latin Mass, beautiful churches and vestments, they're as real as you and I are. They have a spirituality which nourished the life of the church right up until the Second Vatican Council. It's not all that bad. It's a great thing, in fact. So, evangelization means spreading the gospel, means bringing souls to Christ, administering the sacraments. What do we teach the people we're trying to evangelize? To come and worship the Lord at Mass. So that really has to be, the source and summit. The Eucharist is the source and summit of the church, but the Eucharist is only brought to us in a ritual, and the ritual is sacred, and the ritual gives us education and inspiration. So I don't find that this is a psychological dodge by saying I like the liturgy, I'm not going to do anything else. No, it's what propels us outward.
Yeah. Well, this is all we have to say, Father, just to put this in context for people. And we've been hearing this narrative for a number of years now. There are those around the Pope, within his circle, and I'm talking about Father Spadaro and Austin Ivory. They have put forth this idea that the liturgy, the old rite, the Roman rite, the traditional Latin Mass as it's commonly known, is somehow an act of rebellion against Vatican II and Pope Francis. And frankly, nothing could be further from the truth. Those things were here before Vatican II and Pope Francis. They'll be here after Vatican II and Pope Francis. I think it's just a preferred style of worship for some people. And they like the sacrality and the silence and the beauty of the Gregorian chant. But they've tried to cast this in this new narrative as a political act. And, well, now there's a related story. In Brazil, a Brazilian priest is facing canonical proceedings after being accused of making schismatic statements and failing to follow the restrictions on the use of the TLM. Father Fabio Fernandes is even being forbidden from public ministry. In a November 23rd decree, he's forbidden from saying Mass at all. Your thoughts on this idea, Father, and it's been years in the making, that this old Mass is somehow, when Pope Benedict went away, suddenly the Mass became this act of political defiance against Vatican II and the current Pope.
Again, I think you're correct. To love the old Mass is not to disregard the Second Vatican Council. The old Mass, or the traditional Latin Mass, however you want to say it, was the Mass celebrated all throughout the Council. Now, the Council authorized revisions, updating things, and basically the judgment that was made by people like the old Masses, it wasn't the Council that was wrong, it was the implementation of the Council that was wrong. And that because the Council didn't rewrite the Missal, that was done subsequently by a group called the Concilium. And it was very controversial because there were some radical elements who were involved in that. And we've had reforms of the new Missal. Pope Benedict made some reforms. And the idea that the old Mass is somehow a threat because you can contrast and compare between the new and the old Missal, Pope Benedict's idea was mutual enrichment. And I would be very happy if we sat down again and said, okay, let's go back, take the old Missal from 1962, and let's see what the Council actually intended, and then revise it accordingly. You know, there was a transitional Missal that was issued, I believe, in 1965, in which there were elements of the Old Mass Latin and English. A few things were changed, but it was essentially the Old Mass. I was very successful. I thought it was good. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, people who like to latch on to a category of people and say they're political opponents and therefore we don't legitimize any of their points of view, no, that's selling them short. They are believing Catholics who are looking for peace with God and their fellow man, and they don't like being called nostalgics or backwardists because they value what, the saints and the people of God valued for, so many centuries.
Yeah. Well, and it seems that they're backfilling with this narrative to justify contemporaneous actions, mainly the removal of bishops and cardinals in some cases, because they like or celebrate the Old Mass, which, if you believe what Bishop Strickland said, that was part of the reason for his dismissal, that he didn't outlaw the Old Mass in his diocese. But I thought bishops were, we were into conciliar outreach. I thought the bishop was being given more power, particularly under this pontificate. Apparently that's not the case. As I mentioned earlier, the so-called German Synodal Way is making headlines again this week. Bishop Stefan Oster described the German bishops as deeply divided, saying a divided episcopacy is, quote, obviously a disaster for the faithful in Germany, end quote. Bishop Oster and 3 other German bishops boycotted a November meeting of the Synodal Way in protest. Now, Oster said his decision, Father, to boycott was an attempt at maintaining unity with Rome. What do you make of the bishop's warning of potential schism should the German church follow this synodal path?
Yeah, this is a very serious question, Raymond. I admire what Bishop Oster has said. Let's recall that this German synodal way is basically a Protestantization of the church. They're trying to have lay people and bishops have equal power in the governance of the church. They want to have a synodal committee. Now, the Holy See has said you can't do that. In fact, Pope Francis recently wrote a letter to 4 German women who had been on the synodal way, who quit because they saw where it was going. And the Pope said he shares their concerns, and he said he had forbidden the forming of this synodal committee back last year, I guess it was in February of this year. The problem is, if the Pope said don't do it in February, and then you have your meeting here in October and November, why are you doing it? They were also told by Cardinal Parolin not to promote anti-Catholic doctrines about homosexuality, and what do we have in priesthood? They're doing it. They're trying to do it. So, yeah, the Holy See has to stop sending letters, and they have to summon the bishops. The Pope recently summoned all the bishops of Spain to Rome to give them advice and listen to them about Spanish seminary life. Well, this is a much more important thing, and I think the Pope should call them in and say, look, I told you not to form the synodal committee. If you're not willing to agree to go along with what I said, then we're going to have to initiate canonical procedure to have you removed. Because what you're doing is Protestantizing the church. The people of God is a hierarchical institution established by God. The shepherds can't turn to the sheep and say, you're equal to me now, tell me how to run my diocese, tell me who I should ordain a priest, tell me who I should send into the pastoral ministry. That shouldn't happen. That can't happen. That happens in Protestantism. Yeah. That's not what we want in the Catholic Church.
Well, but Father, this is why I think so many Catholics are alarmed, frankly anxious right now. And I see the mail. I mean, I wish I could. One show, I think I'm just going to read my email out from viewers because it's heartbreaking, it's terrifying in some cases, but they are so confused and upset that you have the Vatican weighing in with absolute clarity and saying, you, Bishop so-and-so, or you, Cardinal so-and-so, you are finished, you are out because you've disagreed or issued some difference of opinion with the prevailing thought in these walls. You're out. Go out to the outer darkness. We never want to hear you again. Now you can't even say Mass. On the other hand, you've got a group of bishops deliberately moving forward and saying, we are changing church teaching and doctrine. We are going to challenge the authority of the Pope himself. And nothing is done. We send letters and beg them to be nice. This is the disconnect or the incoherence of action that I think has so frustrated and hurt Catholics. Before I go on, I'll let you comment on that.
No, you're right. And, you know, let's get down to brass tacks with these German bishops. They don't care about Catholic teaching except for those four, because they're obviously disregarding obedience to the Pope on a matter when the Pope tells them what to do as regards don't enter into a heretical process. And then secondly, why in the world would you ever think that Jesus Christ, when he told the apostles, you know, to care for the flock, that he meant that the flock was also supposed to be in that group running the church? This is impossible. Right. We're not the Episcopal Church has meetings periodically, and they have what they call the House of the Laity, and they get to vote on things. This is wrong. This is not how the church is organized. Are lay people deprived because they're not bishops? No. The greatest gift in the world is Jesus Christ received in the sacrament of Holy Eucharist once you're baptized. Anything else is a ministry and service to the others. So the fact that, you know, lay people aren't bishops, that's not a problem. What's a problem is bishops who don't want to be bishops and then say, well, lay people have to share my authority. You can't do that in the Catholic Church. It is not a do-it-yourself religion. And I'm afraid that's what the Germans are talking about.
Yeah. Cardinal Robert Sarah spoke out this week against what he called, Father, the destruction of the Mass in the West and the dilution of Catholic worship, inculturation in Africa and Asia particularly. He said this: we are witnessing today, especially in the West, a dismantling of the values of faith and piety and the destruction of the forms of the Mass. We work to sprinkle the liturgy with African and Asian elements, thus distorting the Paschal mystery that we celebrate. We place so much emphasis on these cultural elements that our celebrations sometimes last 6 hours. Our liturgies are often too banal and too noisy, too African, and less Christian. Cardinal Sarah is often mentioned as a favorite, by the way, in the next conclave. What do you make of his words here? And are we beginning to see indications of the pendulum swinging away from the vision of the liturgy we've heard in recent years?
Well, Cardinal Sarah is correct, and he's courageous, and that's one reason I love this man so much. He's written some wonderful books, and he is not afraid to stand in front of a microphone and tell people things they might not want to hear. You know, he's an African who understands that, you know, making a Mass extra long because you add non-Christian elements and you make it into a self-expression of human gifts, you know, through dances and endless songs and elements that are not found in the Missal, that this is wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, the great temptation that Pope Benedict, and when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, he wrote about it frequently, was the temptation of self-worship, that we go to church in order to celebrate our gifts. That's a very secondary reason you go to church. You go to church to worship God, to beg pardon for sin and aid to live a virtuous and holy life. Now, the gifts that we receive, we're thankful for, but we don't ascribe them to ourselves. And by the way, when Christianity came into the world, all the world was pagan except for the Jews. Christianity developed out of Judaism, and then we went out and we suppressed pagan errors. We shouldn't introduce those errors into the church. And how much, I was a pastor in Manhattan. I dealt with various different people. Superstition is always lurking under the surface of a lot of things that people are interested in. And they can be from the modern, the modern age, former ages, first world, third world. We have to make sure that we don't allow superstitions and human interest to adulterate our worship. Cardinal Sarah is absolutely right. And, I have to say, Cardinal Sarah is extremely popular among Africans precisely because they recognize what he's saying is true.
Right, the clarity of his teaching. Father Jerry Murray, we will leave it there. You can find commentary by Father Jerry at thecatholicthing.org. Father Jerry, Merry Christmas. We'll see you soon.